If I can able to share the screen here. I think someone has to need to provide that option now. Yeah, thank you. That should work. Here. Okay, so I have the pleasure now to present one of the results from the DataBench project, which is a European project in the context of the Horizon 2020 program that has been running for 3 years and will be ending this year. So we will present this with 3 different perspectives. I will talk about the DataBench framework and show some examples of project pipelines where our pipeline architecture we can again relate to benchmarks. Then Tudor will talk more about how we have classified and categorized benchmarks and benchmarking communities that can support the big data AI pipelines. And finally, Thomas will give a presentation and demonstration of the toolbox that is supporting this. The foundation of the work when it comes to classification of benchmarks and pipelines has its roots in the Big Data Value Association in Europe and the BDVA reference model. It talks about different areas of interest in the big data and AI architecture context. What we see to the left is the generic data pipeline that you might be familiar with because it's something that it's something we all do when we do big data analytics, AI and machine learning, dealing with data acquisition, collecting data, preparing data, doing data analytics, including AI, machine learning and training, and then having data presentation, visualization and interaction with the environment. Besides the BDVA reference model, and you see the links to bdva.eu for more information there. We also have an activity in Europe now on an AI framework. So this shows some of the areas in the so-called European activity on AI, data and robotics and relevant areas. And we see that this pipeline is also mapped into the different areas of sensing, knowledge learning, reasoned decision making, action and interaction. It's further also related to the ISO SE 42 AI and big data reference models. So it is a common high-level pipeline, which is kind of well known, but also useful to look at when we are categorizing benchmarks, looking at benchmark areas, but also when we look at tools and components and where they belong, how they are connected in a pipeline context, and also where benchmarks are addressing these different areas. So we have a number of European projects in the big data public-private partnership, more than 40 running projects now. And we are all relating these projects to these steps and to the reference model. A lot of the projects has a need requirement to analyze different parts of the architecture where benchmarks are a useful tool. And it's for this purpose that we have developed the DataBench toolbox, which contains a catalog of technical benchmarks. It also has an aspect of business benchmarks and will support different kind of users for the use of benchmarks. Technical users that might use benchmarks for evaluating relevant technologies or have their own technologies they want to compare with others. Business users who are looking at benchmarks from a business perspective, but also benchmarks providers that might want to ensure that their benchmark is promoted for use for relevant users. So the toolbox, as you will see later, has a catalog of different benchmarks. And our strategy is basically to include all relevant benchmarks that they are developed as serious benchmarks with the purpose and associated communities. So in this context, of course, the Bench Council community is a very relevant community. We see the AI Bench here as one of the benchmarks just for the list here. What we have been doing is to going through all of the benchmarks since year 2000, in particular in the big data area and now increasingly also in the AI area, to categorize those as how they match into the different steps of this generic pipeline, where we see this pipeline elements of data ingestion and data storage, data analytics, data visualization, and user interaction. So there are 50 plus benchmarks classified and categorized and made available with their descriptions and links in the toolbox. And one of the main structure that we find quite useful is then mapping of benchmarks and tools and components, and also patterns of reusable configuration of components into these four main steps. And then we have blueprints that takes down different alternatives in the steps based on different perspectives. So in addition to the steps itself, we can view this from pipelines that are having a batch processing approach, being real-time oriented or being interactive. Also to distinguish this based on different data types, we saw some of the main data types in the reference model, such as structured data, unstructured, semi-structured data, IoT data, media data, language data, graph data. Typically, depending on data types, there might be different pipeline adaptations that we can see. And accordingly, we can also categorize benchmarks, but also tools, components, and standards relating to this, also on the whole, say, transcontinuum from edge to fog and cloud and HPC, supercomputing and infrastructure. So as I mentioned, in the European Horizon 2020 program, which we are running now, we have a number of projects, 40 plus. Here is an example of 5 projects and their pipelines. So this is the Data Bio project that deals with big data and AI for bioeconomies. And they have a number of pipelines. This is one for graph data, so linked data for data integration and publication. I will not go through, say, the details of each of the pipelines, just a point to show that the same pipelines is used for this data type of linked data and graphs and graph processing. And we see a typical processing pipeline for linked data, knowing that there is a lot of benchmarks related to these different steps for linked data and graph data. There are others in the area of IoT and real-time data. We see here elements of a pipeline for IoT real-time data processing with the different steps there. And looking at concrete projects, we can identify components and how these different components fit into the different areas of the pipeline. And again, there are benchmarks, such as IoT benchmarks, that are relating to these different steps of an IoT real-time processing pipeline. So this was from the Data Bio projects. Here is another project called IBIDAS, which has a number of other domains and application areas. And we see how this architecture, of course, each of these projects is a large project. So this is just a high level of the perspective of the benchmarks, dealing with batch and streaming data and doing data selection, preparation, and execution, also relating to these steps and looking at relevant benchmarks in this context. A third project is Day-by-for-You. This is a project that is dealing with the graph data, linked data, integrating data for procurement analysis, and has looked into their chain of data, also following the same structures, particularly with an interest of benchmarking of data ingestion and identify bottlenecks and opportunities through use of benchmarking there. And also on doing queries and visualization of the results. So some of the benchmarks here have been in the linked data areas, like the Linked Data Bench Console, semantic publishing benchmark to do benchmarking of triple store databases. So this is an example of another project and with some benchmark that has been executed, identified and executed in this context with different kind of performance analysis. Further, another project again is Track&Now, which has an architecture which we see here. And they have the interest of, say, benchmarking part of their architecture against the relevant benchmarks in the different areas, again, for the whole set of pipeline, and maybe not all of the elements, but looking at different parts of it. including also the link to machine learning, where we can see here the final project I have on my list here, which is Deep Health. This is dealing with machine learning and deep learning for image analytics in the health area, such as cancer and other identifications. What we see in this pipeline is an enhancement of the data analytics machine learning part, because obviously here there is the activities of data partitioning, augmentation, model training, and model evaluation going into the steps of data analytics and machine learning. So they are doing a number of algorithms, deep learning algorithms for health image analysis, and are comparing their algorithms here in the context of relevant benchmarks for deep learning. So this was just an example, say, of the usefulness for a number of projects we have that are relating their activities to the main steps of this pipeline. It's obviously specializations of this for all of the projects that we see an example of here. But a common pipeline is a useful way of structuring not only benchmarks, but also the tools and components, the patterns of technologies being used, as well as various other aspects for, say, analyzing and comparing different projects. So what we will do now is to talk a bit more about the benchmarks that we have classified according to this. Here, just some contact point here. The databench.eu is the website, and you find further references there. But I'll now give the word over to Todor Ivanov, who will be able to talk about how we have addressed the benchmark communities and relevant benchmarks to categorize and bring that into the toolbox context. So I will now give the word, or we will give the screen over to Todor, who will present this. So Todor Ivanov should be there. I will stop sharing my screen, and then we will allow Todor to share his screen.
Thank you, Arne. So now I'll try to share my screen. Yeah, I think it should be working.
Yeah, we see it now, I think. Or maybe it's mine. Let's see.
Do you see it now? I think you should be able to see
Yeah.
mine.
We see
Okay,
it now,
so
I think.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so as Arne already mentioned, I'll tell you a bit about our methodology and how we map the benchmarks to this pipeline model, to the pipeline methodology. So you see here on the top the 4 steps that Arne explained. So these are the typical pipeline steps that you usually have when you build an application. And then what we did is we mapped them to the BDVA reference model steps that you also saw in the slides from Arne. And we started basically from these steps, then you can go to finding the appropriate benchmark. So using our matrix. What you can also do based on this, you can then search in the different types of technologies. So for example, you can use the popular big data and AI landscape, where you have also similar categorizations of the different available technologies. And then based on the categories that you search for, you can check here and find your tool. Then you can go back and you can search for the benchmark that can help you to compare your big technologies. And in the middle, I put also the projects that you just saw from Arne. Actually, they're real examples of building and using such pipelines. And basically, this methodology helped them in finding the right benchmarks. On this slide is a more like deep example where I try to map some of the benchmarks from the communities. As you can see here, some of the Bench Console benchmarks and how they also match to the different pipeline steps. Also the LDBC console, where we saw an example for that they're using one of the benchmarks, the Day by For You project. And also IBDUS, which is using TPCH and HighBench as benchmarks to test their platform. And what we did further is basically we added a category for each of the pipeline steps, and we mapped it to all of the benchmarks that we have. And in this way, it's an easy start. So when you start building your pipeline, you can search for benchmarks that are in your particular step. And in this way, you can then also pick your technology. This is the full matrix. So as you can see, we have many benchmarks, and it's not possible really to be readable on one slide. These are actually the other categories that we also have. They are from the BDVA model and also the data types. And the newest one are the pipeline steps. And in summary, I just put here, so to update the numbers, the benchmarks that we have evaluated and gather are more than 80 between 99 and 2009, not even the benchmarks for this year. And all these benchmarks, we put them also in the toolbox, so they are searchable and you can find information from them. So this is here, this list, which will be much bigger. In addition to that, we have benchmarks that we call integrated. And these benchmarks are the one that are integrated in the executable element of the toolbox, which means that if you use this toolbox element, it helps you to automatically execute these benchmarks. And for this, we have a process which is also documented in the toolbox. And if you have time, maybe Thomas will tell us a bit about this. Yeah, this is how it looks like when you look at a particular benchmark. I pick here the YCSB benchmark as one of the most popular. And we have tried to put the most important information when you pick a benchmark. So starting from a brief description, then going to the type and the domain of the benchmark, the workload, so short description of the workload, the data types involved, and then the technologies which are for which it is implemented and which can be compared with this benchmark. Of course, the metrics, and I think quite important also some results and existing reference papers. What we also have, we have a list of benchmark communities, since they're actually important user of our platform. And with this, the idea is that we have also for the people that are not familiar, good like a starting point of the community, so that everyone can go here and then find more information on their pages. And in particular for the Bench Console, this is like the starting page where we have listed all the, with some brief info and some of the benchmarks with link. And what's more important is that this page can be also updated from the Bench Console community. Here is another example of the TPC community, which is also one of the oldest and for database benchmarks, one of the most popular. Here also we have some further links and some of the most popular benchmarks. Yeah, I think this is my last slide. So now I'll give the word to Thomas to show you the toolbox and how we actually implemented all this. Thomas,
thank you,
can
Todor.
you share?
Yeah, thank you, Todor. Let me share my screen, 1 second. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, good. So thank you very much to the organizers, of course, for inviting us, and to Arne and Todor to introduce the toolbox. In fact, this is making my life easier because you already explained most of the things that I'm going to show you. So basically here in the screen, what you can see is the web front end of the toolbox. So as Arne and Todor were explaining, the idea of the DataBench toolbox is to provide a way for different type of users to access to information and benchmarks, but not only technical benchmark, but also explanation and information about business benchmarking. So in the toolbox, we have two main, let's say, concepts. One is the technical benchmark, which is actually the benchmarking tools that are able to be found in the toolbox. But also we have what we call knowledge nuggets, which are like small pills of information about benchmarking with different point of view. So not only technical, but also from the business perspective. So if you look here at the toolbox, what you can find is a typical web page, but with several links. Here we have a menu where you can find ways of browsing a catalog of benchmark, browsing some specific knowledge about benchmarking, and several other options. So I have already logged in with an administrator user, so that's why you see so many options. But if, for instance, I log out right now, you will see that a regular user that enters to the toolbox without logging in, they will see only a few of those options. So one of the things that I will encourage you, if you are interested in searching and browsing our toolbox, is to actually create a user, which is free. So no problem for you to create a user. So you will be able to see more options as I see right now. So basically, as I mentioned, we have these two main concepts, benchmarks and knowledge nuggets, but also we have the possibility of doing other things here. So besides some information about the toolbox itself, you have the possibility of browsing through our, what we call user journeys. So what are user journeys? Those are like small pieces of information, shortcuts for you to understand what you can do in the toolbox. So how you can search, how you can find interesting results, with some examples on links where you can find this information. Of course, this is very useful at the beginning. Once you are getting used to the toolbox, it will be easier for you to go directly to the specific links. But in principle, if you are a new user, for instance, and you are a technical user that would like to find something related to benchmarks, you should go here to the technical part of the user journeys, where you will find user journeys for what we call beginners and advanced users. So this is basically, if you are, for instance, someone that is the first time that find the toolbox, you will be probably interested on reading through these user journeys and find the right pieces of information to understand how to search, how to find information, how to run benchmarks, this type of things. So in here, for instance, you can see that you can browse the entire catalog of the toolbox. This has been shown in one of the previous slides. So this is the catalog with entire set of benchmarks that we have already cataloged in the toolbox. So this is a growing catalog. So if you have any benchmark that you would like to add here, you have to let us know by using this option of suggesting new benchmark. With this option, you will be able to be directed to a specific form where you can provide, besides your email address for us to be in contact with you, some generic information about the benchmark you have, when it was created, which is the originating group, the type of benchmark, and also some interesting references from the web that can be important for us to understand the importance of the benchmark, and then add it to the catalog. So this is the way for you to do so. But besides that, in the user journey, you have links to specific parts of the toolbox. For instance, besides browsing the catalog, you can search by different ways. So here, for instance, we have the search by BDB reference model, already introduced by Arne and Todor. So you have here the reference model, but you can click on the model to find benchmarks or knowledge related to this specific category. So in this particular case, for instance, if I click on the data visualization and user interaction layer, you will see that we have search results for this particular layer, showing some of the benchmarks that are related to this particular layer. For instance, here we have a bench for the Bench Council. So by clicking on it, you will see what Todor was showing before about the information of the benchmark that is clickable, so you can access to web references, papers from this benchmark, etc., etc. So this is a kind of catalog of a specific benchmark with lots of information, as Todor was mentioning before. And this is for each of the benchmarks that we have in the catalog. This is the search and visualization, but you can see that also we have related nuggets, not only benchmarks. So we can, for instance, browse through the data visualization tools. And in here, you can see that we have several examples of different visualization tools that are available out there. For instance, Tableau, which is a quite typical visualization tool, and you have links to go directly to the website. You have information in here about other interesting URLs for understanding each of the tools. So as you can see, it's not only benchmarking, but we have a related knowledge to the specific areas. For instance, this data visualization that can help you to understand which tools are out there. You can click also in the vertical. So for instance, if you go to the IoT vertical, you will see that also some benchmark related to IoT are bringing here at the table, and also the same for the knowledge around IoT. So this is just for you to understand how to go through the toolbox, but you have also several other ways to search for this type of information. You have this search that I mentioned by guided search, which is a search by annotation, by tags. So you have each of the benchmarks, each of the knowledge nuggets are annotated with different tags. So for instance, if you go here, and you can see which annotations are available. You can click on any of them. For instance, this benchmarking organization tag. And in here you see the benchmarking organizations that are available in the toolbox. Todor already mentioned that we have information about the Bench Council, which is here, as you can see. But also we have a list of the benchmarking communities that also was shown before, where you can go directly to the different links or to different links in the toolbox or outside the toolbox. So you have different ways of browsing this information. So basically this is it. The most important thing is about searching, but also there is other ways of searching, for instance, by Blueprint, with this information that was also shown by Todor and Arne related to the different steps of the data value chain. So you can also search by each of the steps, and you will see different benchmarks and associated knowledge, or even in some of the specific parts of the generic blueprint that we have created for mapping with different architectures. You can find specific benchmarks or a specific knowledge around this. So for instance, if you click on this ETL aspect of data acquisition, you can find benchmarks that are related to this aspect of data acquisition, which is ETL, and related nuggets, where you can find also information about tools that are available for different ETL aspects. So we don't have time to go further, I think, but just for you to know that we have also access to other tools, such as this DataBench AI Observatory, where you can find interesting visualization and some different topics related to AI, related to big data, and related to even to news about benchmarking of big data in a world map. So you have different ways of visualizing different type of information in DataBench that is not only around benchmarking, but also around accumulated information related to news and other things. So I think that's all from my side for these 10 minutes. Thank you.